oh my God, who am I going to be when I don't have that business card anymore? What's my identity when I can't define myself by this amazing company, and when I don't fly around like in business class and meet all these very important people, when I'm not surrounded by all these smart guys and girls. And it didn't take long, I tell you. It took a few days only until I realized that actually the world doesn't revolve around McKinsey, and that what matters is who I am and how I show up and what I bring to the table as me, as opposed to the name on the business card of the company you work for.
Hi, everyone. I'm just delighted to have Dr. Stefanie Teichmann on the show. She has a fantastic track record in working for corporates. She started off as a McKinsey consultant and then went to leadership roles in Nike Europe and then Coca-Cola worldwide, and then finally had a stint at Google before spreading her wings and starting her own company and becoming a consultant again. And lots of experience, and going to be tremendous to hear from you. So, but before we get into it, why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about your story?
Sure. First of all, hi, Dave.
Hi.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Very much looking forward to our chat. Yeah, so I think it was in 2018 when I decided, as you say, to spread my wings, and I founded TECA, Teichmann Executive Coaching and Advisory. And before that, I had the privilege of working with some amazing global companies, household brand names, as you mentioned, Nike, Coke, Google. In 2018, I thought it was time to leave the corporate safety net and do something on my own. What I'd always been interested in my corporate career is this intersection between business and people, because I think that's where all the magic happens. And that's what I wanted to do with TECA. So as you, I'm sure, can hear, I'm originally German. I've lived and worked in many countries across Europe and the US, but now I'm based in Dublin. That's where TECA is headquartered. And from here, we serve clients from all over the world, mostly like C-suite -1, but also like entrepreneurs and high potentials. And when I say we, that's a small team of business coaches and consultants, all of whom have like profound, deep business knowledge and experience. And we focus on executive coaching, on leadership development. We also offer capability building workshops. For instance, one of our signature programs is on executive presence, because that's still a hot topic.
Which linked in very nicely with my book, Locker Room Power, which is all about aura and presence.
Oh, no, exactly. And I'm happy to talk about that too. The fun thing about executive presence is that so many people get the feedback, you have to work on your executive presence. And then I'm like, yeah, and what the hell is that?
Yes.
Because it's such a weird term. And then what we also do is we help organizations through transformation processes. It comes in handy that I got a PhD in change management and also taught as a professor for strategic development and organizational change for more than a decade. And I think this topic is becoming more and more important, especially in the age of AI that we're all living in right now.
Right. Well, I'm going to fire off my first question is, most people have pivotal moments in their career and where change happens. Can you point to one or two of your pivotal moments and how you actually handled them? Because obviously you've made a few changes, and there are things that go on when you make those changes, both internally, personally, and also in the actual job scope.
As you say, there certainly have been a number. I think the first one I'd like to mention is when I moved from being a consultant to working in a corporate. It's a very different world. When you work in a consultancy, you are on a project, which may be weeks or months. You work with a team just for the time you're doing this project. You're under extreme time pressure. You have to deliver. It's all about delivering. It's all about deadlines and, getting results for the clients. When you work in a corporate, the dynamics are different. You will not just leave after the project, but you actually have to continue to work with those people, right? And I was lucky enough to have an amazing mentor at the time who I remember very clearly took me aside a couple of months in and said, like, you know, you're doing great work on these projects here. I was working in strategic planning at the time, but, you know, this is not consulting. So what really matters here is that you bring people along. And if you want to create sustainable change and make things last, then it's really important that people enjoy the process and that you involve them much more than I did at the time. And of course, you also need to deliver results, but it doesn't need to be 150%. And if you miss the deadline by a couple of days, that's all right too. Because the how is at least as important as the what. And I think that was something that stayed with me, to this very day. And that's also something I definitely am trying to instill in the people I work with, the leaders I coach. And then maybe the second thing I want to mention is, because it's not a particular point in time, but it's something that was very defining for my career, is the fact that when I look back, I left every single one of my jobs without having a new job. That's obviously, not everybody's cup of tea. And a lot of people were like, why are you doing this? But to me, it felt like once I had finished a particular chapter and I felt that, this story had come to a natural ending, I felt that I needed to leave. And I guess I had, call it overconfidence, call it naivety, but I always thought like, okay, you know what, you're good at what you're doing. You will find another job. And I did. And there were a couple of really important lessons in there, because it wasn't easy. Like when I left McKinsey, for instance, I didn't have the job at Nike, right? It took me a few months. But what I did learn in that moment was, when you worked at McKinsey, and McKinsey could be, you replace it with any name, as your first big job, I felt, oh my God, who am I going to be when I don't have that business card anymore? What's my identity when I can't define myself by this amazing company, and when I don't fly around like in business class and meet all these very important people, when I'm not surrounded by all these smart guys and girls. And it didn't take long. I tell you, it took a few days only until I realized that actually the world doesn't revolve around McKinsey, and that what matters is who I am and how I show up and what I bring to the table as me, as opposed to, the name on the business card of the company you work for. And that was a very important lesson for me early on, because that gave me then the courage in the following career transitions to leave when I felt it was time to leave, even if I didn't have something perfect lined up.
I think that's very interesting. And I always say to, performers, elite performers in anything, that the best are the bravest. And you need to have courage to excel. And that's a great example, I think, of courage, because it is much more comfortable and safer to stay where you are and try redefine yourself within the job that you're in. But I think you also miss out on an adventure, because working for different companies and now for yourself, you've experienced a broad spectrum of what you can do in many different situations, which I think is brilliant. But I think, equally, I think some people reinvent themselves or whatever within a company and do very well and can be with a company for a long time. But, I kind of align it to, I'm from South Africa and I left very young at 17. And I know, and obviously as a parent now, I understand a bit more how devastating it was for my parents that I never went back to live in South Africa. And the friends that I had in high school and everything, it kind of disappears, because, when they say distance makes a heart grow fonder, not quite, because, it's very difficult to keep relationships going over such a long distance, over years and years. And I kind of came to the decision that in life you choose the adventure, which is maybe a lot of change, or you choose to create very, very deep roots where you are. And they both have their benefits and they both have their downsides. And you basically can't have both. I think you need to either go on the adventure or create the deep roots. That's just the way I kind of see it.
I absolutely agree with that, and you're totally right. There is no right or wrong here. I think the point I was trying to make, what I learned about for myself, is there is a risk for every leader in any organization to define yourself by your job and by your title and by the greatness of the brand or the company you work for. And I think that's kind of a dangerous route.
It is very dangerous. And, I won't mention any names or companies, but I know of two people who had nervous breakdowns when they lost their jobs in big corporate. And it's because they totally lost their identity. It seemed like they didn't feel like they were anything without the badge.
Exactly.
Really, really, really struggled for many, many years to come to terms with the fact that they no longer had the corporate might behind them.
Yeah.
I think what you say there is not only powerful, but very important, that, first and foremost, you got to know who you are, and that, without the corporate power behind you, you can still survive and still go on to do other things.
Yeah.
My next question is, obviously these were decisions that you had to make. What sort of model, or how do you make decisions? I know it's probably a very big subject, but in a nutshell, how do you make decisions?
I think on the one hand, I'm a very rational person, and I obviously look at the facts and the pros and the cons. But in the end, I do believe that you need to listen to your gut. One thing that is, let me call it a motto or mantra. One thing that is very important to me, and it's so important that it's actually the only quote that I put on my own website, is about perspective. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so for most relevant decisions, I apply some kind of reframing where I try to put myself in different shoes. I look at a problem through different angles. I think about, what would that look like if I sat on the other side of the table? Or what would that look like if I looked at it not through a strategic angle, like 3-5 years out, but through an operational tactical angle, like, how are we going to make this work in the next 3 months? So I'm trying to look at any kind of bigger decision or question or challenge through different angles, and to try to avoid or at least mitigate the own bias that we all have.
That's very good. I've got a question for you that on gut feeling, intuition, whatever you want to call it. When you maybe want something badly, I think it is actually possible to invent a gut feeling, to feel like it is your gut instinct. So how do you kind of distinguish between, what's an invented gut feeling versus a genuine gut feeling?
I'm not sure you can.
Yeah.
Because when it's so present for you, you believe your own delusion, I guess,
Yeah.
And therefore I think it's really important to look at it, as I said, through, to change perspectives and put different lenses on, to try to, I don't want to say objectify something, but to just get away from, okay, I really want this, but in the end, I still think whether it's like a fictional gut feeling or a real gut feeling, in the end, you need to follow that. If it feels so right, and then you just need to live with the consequences.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I have learned is there's very little in life that's irreversible. You know, if you make a decision and somehow it doesn't work out, it's okay. You can change it. You know, there are consequences with that. Usually it costs money. But, you know, you can't just change the direction and say, okay, that, and just because it didn't work doesn't necessarily mean it was the wrong decision, because maybe you just needed that lesson, or that takes you in the path that you need to go. So I think I've come to the conclusion that there's very little in life that you can do wrong, because, you know, ultimately you're going down a path and it will take you somewhere. And
Yeah.
who's to know it's the right or wrong path? I think it's just your path.
Yeah.
Maybe that sounds a bit woo-woo, but
No, I absolutely agree. I absolutely, it's like, you're always at a crossroads, and you can't go both ways.
yeah.
And you never know where the other road would have led you. And, and what's the point in then, worrying about it?
No, definitely no point, I don't think. This question is about pressure. And when you're working with leaders of a company and they're under pressure and they're really feeling the heat, what do you try to give them?
I mean, obviously, leaders react very different under pressure and have different coping mechanisms. How I try to help is to give them an anchor. And it needs to be an anchor that is obviously their anchor and relevant for them. Apart from let's all take a step back and take a deep breath to really remember what is actually your goal here in this situation. What's actually your objective? What do you actually want to achieve? And if you remember that, then look at the situation that you're in front of right now, your behavior that you're displaying, and ask yourself, is this actually helping my longer term objective, or is it harming? And in my experience, even that little thought experiment helps people to shift their mindset, their state, their energy, and to focus then on what matters in the moment. And maybe to make it more practical, like if you have like a leader who's working on an important project and with a team, and all of a sudden, the deadline is pulled forward significantly, they figure out that the data is not reliable, or things like that. As a leader, you have a choice to be stressed out and to push harder on the team. And in a moment like that, if as a leader you were to remember what your original goal was, for instance, obviously I'm making this up now, but for instance, like building credibility with the stakeholders so that they would continue to keep going, putting resources in this particular project. If that's your goal, then pushing the team harder and making your stress, like burdening them with your stress, will not lead to results that helps you build credibility with your stakeholders. So instead, when you take this step back, when you take a deep breath and you think about, okay, with all of these problems that I'm seeing here, how can I still go for this objective that I have? How can I still make that happen? Then you would probably come to different solutions where you'd be like, okay, dear team, let us have a quick discussion around what we can still deliver in the best quality. and so on and so on. You get the idea. It's really about a reminder of what is it you're actually trying to achieve and what will help you get there, as opposed to not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I like to ask is, what type of leader do you want to be?
Exactly.
And then, it's very easy. Are you, you know, it's one thing saying what you want to be, but this is the moment to prove that you are what you want to be, or you are who you say you are.
Yeah.
And so
I could not agree
rather than
more.
seeing this as a pressure that's hurting you, see it as a pressure that's proving who you are, proving what you can do when it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to be good when things are going well. And it's very tough to be good when things are going badly. But that is actually, I think, what separates the great from the good or average, is in the high pressure moments, they are the leaders that they think that they are and want to be, and they are able to hold that line even when things are very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how you create the trust in you as a leader. If you consistently and reliably behave, the way that you want to show up as a leader. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. And I mean, I see it with, in sport, I see it with coaches and parents a lot, where they expect the player out there, their kid or the player out there, to be really calm under pressure. And then they're, pacing up and down, or, covering their heads and, going crazy on the sideline. And so, well, they're the ones actually under the pressure. Yes, of course, you're with them and you're feeling the pressure, but you can't expect them to be cool under pressure if you can't demonstrate it yourself.
Absolutely. Energy is so contagious.
Yeah.
It's one of these things there. What I also find interesting then is that sometimes people and, humans, we just underestimate the impact that how we show up, the impact that has on others, right? And to me, great leadership really always starts with that kind of self-awareness. Because if we don't have the self-awareness to know, how we are being experienced, as opposed to the story we tell ourselves, our own narrative in our own head about how we are, might not have a lot to do with how we actually are being experienced by others. And that self-awareness to me is absolutely critical.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. And really, to get that self-awareness, you have to ask other people some tough questions. Don't. And I think this is very difficult for leaders, because you have to try and find people around you. And that's why I think having an outside coach can really help, that are going to tell you a truth. I'm not saying the truth, but a truth that you might think or is very different from the story that you're telling yourself. So you can take a step and go, oh, actually, do I really do that? Or do I really sound like that? Or do I really come across like that? Well, yes. And though tough to hear, it can really help in work in a narrower band. If you work in a wide band where you're up and down like this, I think we all work in bands, but the narrower you can make that band to how you are and how people experience you, I think that gives a lot of trust and confidence as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that we do that I find is most powerful are interview-based 360s. I mean, everybody has 360 surveys, right, left and center, right? And nothing wrong with that. However, in my experience, we all know how we fill these in, we tick boxes, and it takes a lot of time, and also they don't really go into any depth. And what I found is even last week, I did a 360 interview process with a client, and I interviewed 8 key stakeholders. It's really fascinating because it allows you to go a little bit deeper into the why. Like it's not just like, does this person demonstrate this behavior, yes or no, but it allows you to give examples, etc. It's still confidential, it's still anonymous, because I then take out like the themes and the patterns and play that back to the client. And that is incredibly eye-opening and not easy for them to come to terms with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as you say, these are obviously also perceptions.
Yeah.
And then as a leader, you need to make up your mind like, okay, how important is this to me? How do I want to show up? And if this is how I'm being experienced, what is it that I want to do about it? Understanding that there is no right or wrong here, but this is genuinely how people see you. And it's up to you to do something with that or decide not to.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, I have a belief that self-awareness is our journey, that we're trying to get more and more self-aware, and it's a difficult journey. And even if you are aware, changing habits is very tough.
Yeah.
But I really rage against this when people say, "Oh, that's just me."
Oh, that's such a lazy response.
Yeah, it just enrages me. I mean, because, well, we all evolve all the time. And even when you're saying it's just me, you're not the same as you were 5 years ago. You still, evolve not that much, but you're never just you, because life happens and it evolves people.
Yeah.
I've got just two more questions for you. And this one is, I know something that you're doing a lot of work on is AI. And you coming from a different approach, because I think everybody's like, what can AI do for me? What can it do for my business? How are we going to implement AI? And just talk a little bit around your approach to AI, because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, AI is obviously all around us. And there is no escaping it, really, and in particular in the business world. So what I'm experiencing is that a lot of leaders are simply overwhelmed, and some of them are aware. Talking about awareness, are aware of that, and others find it very hard to admit that. But, just even if you just think about you and me, every day there is like, oh, here's the latest tool and this is what AI can do, and so on and so on. And when you're like running a business where you feel like
FOMO on steroids.
Oh, absolutely. And, and the board is asking you like, oh, what is your AI strategy? And you think your competitors are all ahead of it, and so on and so on. There's definitely an anxiety around it. And I think my approach is probably, like, I would say 3-pronged. Like, first of all, you need to work with leaders on their mindset towards anything to do with AI and technological change. And when I say mindset, there is this fine line where I do believe that nowadays leaders have to have a foundational knowledge of AI. However, they are not expected and cannot be expected to be experts and to know everything, because they can't, right?
It's impossible.
So what they do need to develop, apart from what I call like a kind of foundational expertise, is a sense of open-mindedness and curiosity to come to terms with the fact that that uncertainty is there to stay. So, I look at it in 3 waves. There's the what is here right now, right? But then there is the next wave, what is around the corner that I can already see. But there's also the complete unknown that neither of us knows about. And you need to have a mindset that allows you to live through all these 3 horizons, right? So mindset is number 1, working on that. And helping the organization with that as well. The second one is absolutely strategy, to be very clear on like what are my strategic priorities and how do they change or how do they stay the same given the opportunities we see with AI. what are the risks associated with it? What are the opportunities and how do I go about them? So really having your own strategy as an anchor, and not just run after some kind of hype because everybody does it, right? The strategic anchor is the second. And the third one is obviously people. How do I bring my people along? How am I able to create a culture? Because, a lot of cultures are still not like that, where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to experiment, where people are invited and allowed to co-create, and where you reduce the resistance and the fear that comes with it. And the important thing about these three things, like mindset and strategy and people, is it doesn't happen sequentially. It needs to happen all in one. You can't wait to bring the people along, until you've figured out the perfect strategy, because in this world, there is no perfect strategy, right? So all of this needs to happen at once. And that's what we are, in a systematic way, are helping individual leaders, but also organizations with, starting with a diagnostic assessment, in terms of leadership on the one hand and organizational capabilities on the other hand, and helping organizations and leaders understand where they actually stand when it comes to AI readiness.
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's a very hot topic, but I think the word overwhelming is going to hit everybody, like a ton of bricks. I think even in your everyday life, I think things are going to be moving very fast. And I think that the most difficult part is, AI is not perfect by any means. And it can feed a load of rubbish to you, sounding very plausible. And I think there's going to be a massive job opportunity for a lot of people who really, really understand AI in trying to get AI to tell the truth and stay on course and not go off on tangents and just to really manage the AI in a sensible way, which hopefully it can be, because it's almost like the news. It's there's people are doing news on YouTube. They're doing it on X. They're doing it on every kind of platform, and everybody's got their angle, and everybody's like, we are the truth. Everybody else is liars. And how do you sort out, who is telling the truth? And it's I think it's very difficult now to figure out, what is truly happening versus what you're being told is happening, from so many different angles. But I think in business, AI, there's a danger that AI can start to do that to a business where it's showing too many opportunities, but the capabilities are not quite there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And of course, critical thinking remains absolutely essential. Ensure that there is, at least in my humble opinion, that there is a human in the loop, right? Even though, the human is not perfect, AI is not perfect, right? And
a bad combination.
So I think, as I said, I think there's a fine line between the risks and the opportunities. And that's why governance models are so important. That's why I think it's also, as part of the strategy, it's so important to be really clear on decision-making processes and accountabilities, like which decisions for particular use cases do you leave completely in the hands of AI? Which decisions, or at one point in the decision-making process, do you say, no, this is where the human needs to, be involved and included? And you can't leave that to chance. That's a process that you need to figure it out, and where you have to have guardrails in place. And transparency is also absolutely critical, like also transparency when it comes to your employees, because they also need to know, is what you are saying as a leader, is that actually true or not?
Yeah.
Sometimes you see situations where employees don't really know if what they're hearing from a leader is actually authentically, genuinely their leader, or it's AI.
Yeah.
Should not replace us.
Is it an AI written speech or your speech? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with help.
Yeah, no,
help,
I agree with that 100%. I think, I mean, in a way, it's just AI is just powerful supplements.
Yeah, totally. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
And but you still have to decide what supplements to take.
Yeah.
You can steal that.
I will.
My last question for you is, obviously worked in different countries, you've had a lot of experiences, and in different times of your life, different people influence you. But if you look back, which sort of person or two people have had a lot of influence on your career or on you as a person, that like it's like, wow, this is, this, if I look back, they really influenced me?
Oh God, there are so many.
Mm.
And it's the interesting thing is it goes both ways in terms of like good influence, and sometimes you look at people and you're like, okay, this is how I really don't want to be, so I think a little bit earlier in my career, there was a lady at Nike who had, she had an amazing influence on me because she was really a proper mentor, and she also was somebody who took a risk on me. And I think that's an amazing leadership capability as well, to look at people and see their potential and take a risk. And it was a situation where I moved from strategy into my first P&L responsibility. And Pat, that was her name. She unfortunately passed away in the meantime. But at the time, not only did she give me very invaluable feedback along the way, sometimes unsolicited, and I really needed to hear it, and it was quite tough, right? But it always came from a good place, because when it really counted, when it was like, okay, now Stefanie needs a P&L, a business role, what are we going to do with her? She was the one to step up and say, like, I have a role here. I know she's never done this before, but I trust that with the right guidance, she will be great. And I think there's still too few people out there who take a risk on young, great talent just because they haven't done something before.
Which is ridiculous in a way, because everybody had to have their first time, even the people making the decisions.
Totally.
It's a strange.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But I mean, it's still the same. Like so many, when you talk to people looking for jobs or having job interviews, and it's like, okay, but have you already led a team of like 500 people? No, I only led a team of 50 people. Well, so what? So she was a great influence. And what I also took away from her is, like, she was such a straight shooter. You always knew where you stood with her. And there was no guessing. There was no hidden agendas, And then I had unfortunately a number of leaders that I experienced that were not great leaders, right? Where it was more about their egos. It was about making them successful. And it was like, if you're not with them, you're against them. They sometimes made you feel like, either you're incompetent or you're a traitor. And in a very subtle way, very subtle bullying, right? And it definitely taught me a lot about myself. It taught me about how I don't want to show up as a leader, but it also helped me, like ask myself a few questions like, okay, do I want to give this one person the power to impact how you think about yourself and how you think about your career, right? And that took quite some practice for me to be able to, to step back and be like, no, I don't want to give this person this power. I can't change him, but I can change my reaction. I can still choose my path, right? And so lots of people with lots of influence, and there's many more that I am to this day incredibly grateful that they spent energy and time listening to me, guiding me, and I think we all need that. And I think one of the lessons that were incredibly important throughout my career that I had to learn over and over again is that you need that support. You need a good network, and that's something you need to actively invest in. When I was young, I thought I could conquer the world by myself, that I didn't need anybody, right? But I do. Yeah. And we all do. Yeah. And thankfully, there were a lot of people who actually stepped up and helped me along the way.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that sport in general gets right, because you cannot succeed in sport without a team around you. Even an individual sport like tennis, and the best in the world always have coaches, and there's a reason for that, because I think the biggest thing that coach can give to any leader is the ability to get out of their own heads. And I think, we all need that. We've got to get out of our own heads and see things, you mentioned it earlier, from totally reframed in a different way. And I think good coaches do that. They give people a totally different perception, or they reframe things for them, and or give them an analogy that clicks something into place. And it's it's very hard. You can get some of it from books and that, but it's in the one-to-one conversations where things I have a thing where it's very healthy to talk a problem. And sometimes, I've talked a problem a lot before suddenly there's that, there's the little step forward. Couldn't see it, but when you talk it through, it can come. And I think, intent is a big thing as well. You mentioned that with Pat having great intent. You knew where she was coming from. And really and truthfully, I think that one of the great traits for leaders is just that candid honesty and no bullshit.
Yeah.
This is how I see it. Whether there was a guy in my career, Billy Knight, and he was very, very popular because he made some terrible decisions, honestly. But at the same time, you always knew that he really believed in them. And he did it because he truly believed it was right. And those decisions could go for you or against you. And it wasn't personal. You just knew that, you could disagree with him, you could come with your arguments and everything like that, but in the end, he would make a decision. As I said, some of them were terrible, but he also made some very good decisions. But you never held anything against him in any way, because you just knew that, it didn't matter who it was. He was going to make the decision based on what he truly believed was the right thing to do, having heard everybody. And it was coming always from the right place. How can we do better? And that's, I think that's a sign of a good leader, where you can decide against people and they're still with you.
Yeah.
Because of where it's coming from.
Yeah, because you care. They know you care.
Yes, that's the bottom line. Yeah, genuine care, which AI can't give.
Not yet.
Not yet. No. Great. I'm going to ask you one last question, and
Sure.
you may or may not be able to answer it. But if you had one piece of advice for a young aspiring leader, what would it be?
I think it's got to be pick your battles, and don't waste energy, on chasing things that really might not move the needle, or trying to be perfect in any way for things that don't really matter. Yeah, so pick your battles, and pick your battles based on your goal and what you really need to be laser focused on, what you really need to get done, and do that right, instead of spreading yourself thin and thinking that you need to win every single argument and have to be perfect in every single way.
I love that. That's very, very good advice. Pick your battles. I wish I'd known that 30 years ago. I picked a lot of battles that actually in the big scheme of things meant nothing. And,
exactly.
And, were total waste of energy.
Yeah.
But that's when you're younger, your ego is a little bigger. You think you need to change the world in many more areas than you need to be involved.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And next, you get to put me in the hot seat, and we'll flip the script and you ask me some questions.
Brilliant. I can't wait.
Great. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching Locker Room Power with David Sammel. If you enjoyed the episode, hit subscribe and leave a comment on your favorite platform. See you in the next one.